For a long time, Earth had been quiet. People believed that the worst days of humanity were already gone. There were no great wars, no nuclear fear, no collapsing governments. The world had become slower, calmer, and tired. Humanity had fought too many battles in the past, and now they only wanted to breathe. Cities stood tall again, oceans sparkled, and people started to dream about peace. Children grew up hearing stories of old wars, not living through them. It felt like the world had finally learned something after centuries of pain. But behind this picture of peace, something was still broken. It was not loud, but it was there, hidden under the silence. The leaders of powerful nations still played their old games. They smiled in public, shaking hands for cameras, but behind closed doors they whispered about weapons, control, and fear. Each country wanted to look peaceful, but also strong enough to scare the others. Scientists continued building machines that could destroy entire cities, but they called them defense systems. Governments talked about unity while secretly spying on their own allies. It was a quiet race, a secret war that no one wanted to admit. People lived their normal lives, unaware that the peace they loved so much was standing on a weak thread. In the streets, people were happy but tired. They worked, they laughed, they tried to love. But somewhere deep inside, everyone knew that peace in the world never lasted forever. It was like holding your breath. You could do it for a while, but not forever. History had always repeated itself, and this time, it was only sleeping, waiting for the right moment to wake up again. The Earth looked beautiful from space, calm and blue, but if you listened closely, you could hear the heartbeat of something restless. The military bases on hidden islands, the testing of strange new weapons in the dark deserts, the secret meetings of leaders. They all pointed toward something dangerous. Everyone claimed they wanted peace, but no one truly trusted anyone else. It was like sitting around a table full of smiling faces, each hiding a knife under it. Ordinary people didn't know much about it. They believed the world was healing. Social media was full of motivational speeches, world peace conferences, and global charities. But behind those bright screens, the real world was getting darker. The rich grew richer, the powerful grew colder, and the poor were left fighting their daily battles. People prayed for stability, for food, for jobs, but the real threat was something no one could see yet: the return of war. There were small signs. Distant explosions that were called accidents. Communication satellites that suddenly stopped working. Ships that disappeared at sea without reason. Each time the government said it was technical failure or human error, but the truth was bigger. Something was happening. Someone was preparing for something, and humanity was pretending not to notice. The peace everyone believed in was not built on trust. It was built on fear. In the quiet nights, a few people could feel it. Soldiers stationed in border camps talked about strange movements on the radar. Scientists working on defense projects saw things they were not allowed to talk about. Journalists tried to uncover secrets, but their reports were removed before anyone could read them. A few voices screamed the truth, but no one listened. Peace was too comfortable, and truth was too heavy. Meanwhile, the younger generation had grown up believing in harmony. They thought war was something that belonged in old history books or movies. They studied art, technology, and the universe, dreaming of a world without bloodshed. But deep inside the hearts of their leaders there was still pride, anger, and greed. The same old emotions that had destroyed civilizations before. The world was not ready to face it yet, but destiny was already moving in that direction. The calmness of the earth was like the silence before a storm. Every sunrise looked beautiful. Every city glowed at night, but that peace was fragile, like glass ready to break with one touch. The small nations looked up to the great powers, hoping they would protect them if danger came. But the truth was, when power is involved, protection always comes with a price. In one part of the world, there was a secret military project being developed far from the eyes of the public. It was said to be a new kind of defense system that could protect humanity from any threat, even extraterrestrial ones. But some scientists working on it whispered that it was not defensive at all. It was a weapon, something that could change the balance of power forever. The project was hidden under the name Peace Shield, a name that sounded calm and harmless. But if the world knew what was really being built, they would not sleep at night. As days passed, people continued living, celebrating, marrying, and building dreams. No one could imagine that the same skies above them would soon burn. There was no warning, no prophecy, no sign, just the feeling that something huge was about to happen. But like always, humanity ignored it. They always ignored the signs before the fall. In universities, students studied history but never understood it. They wrote essays about peace without realizing that peace only exists when everyone agrees to be kind, and humans had never truly agreed on that. Nations still argued over land, religion, and pride. The old wounds of the world had never healed. They were just covered. And then there were those who still remembered the last great war. The old soldiers who had seen death up close. They watched the world pretending to be peaceful and shook their heads. They knew how quickly love could turn into hate, how fast peace could turn into fire. They warned the new generation that peace built on lies never lasts, but their voices were lost in the noise of a busy world. Humanity had come so far. They built machines that could reach other planets, cured deadly diseases, and connected every human being through technology. But even after all that, they had not cured their oldest weakness, pride. Pride had always been the first spark before destruction, and once again it was silently rising. The calm before the storm lasted for years. People got used to safety. They stopped paying attention to what governments were doing, stopped asking questions, stopped caring. The silence felt peaceful, but it was not peace. It was waiting. And deep in the shadows of that waiting, the future of humanity was being written. They didn't know it yet, but soon, one event would destroy the illusion of mercy. One act would turn the world's calm into chaos. One strike would make humanity remember who they really were. Survivors, warriors, and creatures of rage when pushed too far. The storm was coming and no one was ready. But the wind had already started to move, softly, almost kindly, before it would scream. It happened so suddenly that no one believed it at first. The world woke up one morning to the sound of breaking news. Every television, every phone, and every radio spoke the same words: attack on human colony. It was not a rumor. It was not a mistake. It was real. The place that had once been full of laughter, families, and workers was now gone, reduced to dust and silence. Thousands of people vanished in a matter of minutes. There were no survivors, no warnings, and no mercy. The strike had come from the sky, fast, sharp, and deadly. At first, people thought it was an accident. Maybe an explosion in the colony's power system or a natural disaster. But soon the truth came out. It was not an accident. It was an attack. Someone had done this. Someone had decided that human lives didn't matter. The world stopped breathing for a moment. People gathered in front of screens, watching the burning ruins of the colony on live broadcasts. Parents cried, children asked questions that no one could answer, and leaders stood in silence. The governments promised to investigate. They sent messages to the world asking for patience and calm. But patience dies quickly when hearts are broken. The people wanted justice, not words. They wanted answers. Who did this? Why? How could it happen under all the so-called peace treaties? Yet even after days, no clear statement came from those in power. Meetings were held behind closed doors. Speeches were written, edited, and delayed. The leaders were afraid to speak the truth, because the truth would mean war. In the streets, anger began to grow. People marched, shouted, and demanded revenge. They carried pictures of the lost, mothers, children, workers, students, and all gone. Candles burned in their memory, but candles could not replace lives. The pain turned into fury. People wanted someone to blame, someone to fight. News channels repeated the same footage over and over again. The colony burning, the cries of survivors on nearby stations, the last recorded message of a little girl saying, "We're scared. Please help us." That message broke millions of hearts. And from those broken hearts, rage was born. The governments met again, this time in panic. Every nation wanted to know who was responsible. Accusations started flying like bullets. One country blamed another. One leader shouted at another. The world that once pretended to be united started cracking. Each leader wanted to protect their own people, their own interests. No one wanted to take responsibility. The truth was blurred behind politics and pride. While leaders argued, the people waited, crying, hurting, and growing angrier by the hour. In small towns, people began preparing for the worst. Markets were empty, food was hoarded, and whispers of war is coming spread like smoke. Mothers hugged their children tighter, and soldiers were quietly moved to bases near the borders. The silence before the storm was gone. Now there was only the sound of fear. A group of scientists who had worked on the colony project revealed a shocking fact. The attack was not human-made. The weapon used was not from Earth. It was something far more advanced, something unknown. The moment that news came out, the world changed again. Humanity realized that they might be facing an enemy they didn't even understand. For the first time in centuries, the fear was not about another human nation. It was about something alien. Still, some leaders refused to believe it. They called it a trick or fake information, but the evidence was too strong. Fragments of strange metal, unknown energy signals, and burnt patterns that no human weapon could make, all of it pointed to the same conclusion. This was an attack from outside Earth. The people didn't care who it was anymore, alien or human. They just wanted revenge. They wanted someone to pay. The world changed its tone overnight. Governments that once spoke about peace began talking about defense. Armies were called back into action. Old military bases reopened, and hidden factories started producing weapons again. The same scientists who once built machines for exploration were now asked to build machines for destruction. The dream of peace ended that day. Humanity had reached its breaking point. In homes across the world, fathers told their sons stories of old wars, reminding them what courage looked like. Mothers cried quietly, afraid of losing their children again. Young men and women signed up for the army in millions, ready to fight for something they didn't fully understand. They just knew they couldn't stay silent anymore. The streets filled with propaganda posters. Defend humanity. Never again. For the fallen. Songs of unity played on radios. But they were not songs of peace. They were songs of preparation. The fire that had been sleeping inside humanity was now awake. The same fire that had once built empires and destroyed them. The same fire that could make humans unstoppable once they were hurt. The Global Council, the last symbol of unity, held an emergency meeting. It was supposed to be a discussion, but it turned into chaos. One representative stood up and shouted, "How long will we keep forgiving? How long will we keep dying?" Others tried to calm him, but his voice was the voice of millions. The council ended with no decision, only anger. No one could agree on what to do next. But the people no longer cared about decisions. They had already made up their minds. In a small city, a boy watched his father return from the army camp wearing his uniform again after 10 years. The boy asked him, "Are you going to fight?" The father nodded and said, "They left us no choice." That single line spread through the internet and became the symbol of the new age. No more choice. No more mercy. Everywhere people shared the same pain. Every corner of the world felt the same heat of revenge. Humanity was no longer divided by nationality or race. They were united by loss. The entire planet had become one family. A family mourning together, burning together, and ready to strike together. As the days passed, strange warnings appeared in the sky. Flashes of unknown ships moving far above the atmosphere. Signals that no scientist could decode. People grew restless. They didn't want to wait for another attack. They wanted to act first. They wanted to show that humanity was not weak. The leaders could no longer stop them. The people's voice was louder than politics. Armies began preparing without waiting for official orders. Fighter jets trained day and night. Communication networks were filled with military codes. Humanity's patience had run out. The first message was sent to space, the short, sharp, and final. "You heard us once. Never again." It was a warning, but also a declaration. Humanity had spoken and the universe had heard it. That night, the world didn't sleep. The streets were quiet, but the hearts were burning. Somewhere in a secret control room, a general stood before a map of the stars and whispered, "If they want war, they'll have it." The breaking point had come. The mercy that once defined humanity had disappeared. The pain had turned into fire, and that fire was ready to spread beyond Earth. The sky that once looked peaceful now seemed like a battlefield waiting to happen. From that moment onward, there was no turning back. The people who once prayed for peace were now praying for strength. The leaders who once signed treaties were now signing orders. The soldiers who once stood guard were now preparing to march. Humanity had finally reached the edge, and this time they were not stepping back. The war had not started yet, but it had already begun inside every human heart. And when that happens, no power in the world can stop what comes next. Humanity was ready to fight not just for revenge, but to remind the universe of something it had forgotten. That humans may love peace, but when peace is destroyed, they become something unstoppable. The first sign that humanity had changed came from the skies. The airfields that were once silent now echoed with the roar of engines. The factories that once built cars and ships now produced machines of war. Every workshop, every laboratory, every engineer had one purpose: to prepare humanity for the coming storm. What had started as a cry for justice had now turned into a mission for survival. Across every continent, the world was waking up, not with fear, but with determination. Humanity had decided, if war was coming, they would not run. They would rise. Nations that had hated each other for centuries started to talk again. Old enemies shook hands because now they had a common threat. The leaders knew they couldn't fight this alone. Earth had to stand as one or fall divided. It was strange to see countries that had once threatened each other's borders now sharing resources and soldiers. But pain has a way of uniting people more than peace ever can. The faces that once argued in political meetings now sat together at war tables, planning strategies not against each other, but for humanity itself. In massive underground bases, scientists worked without rest. They were the new soldiers fighting with tools, not guns. They took every piece of technology ever invented and made it stronger, faster, and more powerful. Old blueprints from abandoned military projects were reopened. They built weapons that could reach the edge of space, armor that could withstand energy blasts, and drones that could fight without fear. The air smelled of burning metal and ambition. But in the middle of all this chaos, there were also people who were scared. Not everyone believed war was the answer. Some prayed for peace, begging their leaders to think again, but no one listened. The world had crossed the line of no return. Every person had lost someone in the attack. The people's grief had turned into unity, and their unity had turned into force. There was no space for mercy anymore. The training camps were full. Men and women, young and old, lined up to join the fight. Some had never held a weapon before, but their eyes burned with purpose. They weren't fighting for land or power. They were fighting for home, for humanity, for the right to live without fear. Every soldier carried a memory, a face, a name, a story that reminded them why they were there. In the great cities, banners were raised with the new symbol of the human alliance, a single burning star surrounded by a circle of unity. It represented Earth, shining in the darkness of the universe, unbroken and defiant. For the first time in history, all nations marched under one flag. The news called it the rise of the war front. Children wrote letters to the soldiers. Schools collected food and supplies, and factories ran day and night. Everyone wanted to be part of something bigger. The fear that had once filled people's hearts was now replaced by pride. It was no longer about revenge. It was about showing that humanity could not be erased. In secret, the generals held late-night meetings. They knew what was coming. They knew the enemy was stronger, faster, and far more advanced. But they also knew something else. Humans had something no other creature had: the will to survive. They could adapt, learn, and fight even when they were broken. That was what made them dangerous. The first human fleet was being built in a hidden location, a massive spaceport stretching across miles of desert. Thousands of engineers worked under blinding lights, building ships that could travel beyond Earth's atmosphere. These ships were not just machines. They were hope made of steel. Every bolt, every wire, every piece of armor carried the weight of humanity's pain. The soldiers chosen for the first mission were called the Dawn Guard. They were trained in silence, away from the world's eyes. Some were the best pilots, others were scientists, medics, or engineers, all united under one mission: to protect Earth at any cost. The world watched as these men and women prepared to leave the planet, not as explorers, but as warriors. As the launch day came closer, Earth became silent again, but this time, it was not fear. It was the silence of pride, of breath held before something great. People stood on rooftops and streets watching the sky. They knew history was being written. When the first ship rose, the ground trembled. Flames and smoke filled the air, and a cheer erupted from millions of throats. Humanity had officially gone to war. In space, the soldiers looked back at the planet that had given them life. It looked peaceful and small, a blue light floating in endless darkness. One of them whispered, "We're not just fighting for Earth, we're fighting for everyone who ever called it home." Those words were recorded and played on every channel across the world. People cried, shouted, and prayed. For the first time, humanity was united, not by peace but by pain. Back on Earth, new cities were being fortified. Giant shields were built to protect them from any attack. Underground tunnels were turned into survival shelters. The governments created the Global Defense Council, a single command center controlling all armies and fleets. The old world order was gone. There were no longer separate nations. There was only Earth. At the same time, messages were sent to the stars, warnings, not requests. This is humanity. We seek no war, but we do not forgive harm. Those words echoed across the universe, reaching whoever had attacked them. It was both a challenge and a promise. The war factories kept growing. New recruits arrived every day. Engineers built machines faster than ever, pushing the limits of what humans could do. Artificial intelligence was developed to assist the armies, and robotic soldiers began walking among humans. Even the oceans were filled with submarines and war drones. Earth had turned itself into a fortress, but not everything was hard and metallic. In the middle of all the preparation, humanity also rediscovered something beautiful: unity. For the first time, there were no flags dividing people, no colors, no races. Everyone shared the same name: human. They shared food, helped strangers, and prayed together. Pain had erased the lines that had once separated them. However, there was also a growing darkness. Some soldiers had started losing their humanity. They trained so hard and saw so much death in simulation that they began to forget what they were protecting. The generals noticed it too, but they said nothing. They needed strong hearts, not soft ones. Mercy was no longer part of the mission. The leader of the global defense stood before the army one night. Millions of soldiers stood in lines under the cold lights. He spoke slowly, his voice echoing through every screen on the planet. "We were once a peaceful people," he said, "but peace was taken from us. We showed mercy, and it was mistaken for weakness. Now we will remind them who we are. We are not just survivors. We are the storm." Those words became history. Every soldier repeated them before battle like a prayer. It became the soul of the new world, a world that was preparing to defend itself with all its might. Even though the war hadn't started yet, everyone could feel it coming. The air itself felt different, heavier. Families said goodbye to their loved ones with smiles, but behind those smiles was fear. No one knew how many of them would return. Yet no one hesitated. They all believed this war was necessary. As the human fleet spread into space, the stars seemed to shine brighter, as if watching. The ships moved in perfect formation, silent and steady. They were searching for the ones who had brought death to their home. But deep inside every soldier's heart, there was more than anger. There was sadness. They wished it didn't have to be this way, but some wars are not chosen. They are forced. And so the rise of the war front began. Not with hate, but with purpose. Humanity had learned that mercy without respect is a mistake. They would still dream of peace, but they now understood something deeper. Peace means nothing without power to protect it. The world had changed forever. The humans who once built cities now built warships. The ones who once prayed for peace now prayed for strength. The earth that once looked soft and kind now glowed like a warrior's shield. And somewhere far away, those who had attacked were finally beginning to realize what they had done. They had awakened the one species in the universe that never gives up. The war front was ready. The soldiers were ready. And above all, humanity was ready. The calm planet that once begged for mercy had transformed into a force the universe would soon remember forever. The first shot of the war was not heard on Earth. It happened far away in the silent blackness of space where there is no sound, only light and destruction. A human patrol ship, moving near the border of the solar system, was suddenly attacked. The explosion lit up the darkness like a new sun. Within seconds, the ship was gone. The crew never had a chance to send a message. But Earth saw it. Every radar, every satellite, every defense station picked it up. Humanity had been waiting for this moment, and now it had come. The war had officially begun. Back on Earth, alarms screamed across military bases. The sky filled with streaks of light as the first wave of human defense ships launched into space. Families ran outside their homes, watching the glowing trails rise higher and higher. There was no time for fear anymore, only action. Every person knew that history was being written again, and this time, humanity would not be the victims. In space, the human fleets moved in perfect formation. The pilots had trained for months, and now their time had come. They were not fighting just for survival, but for justice. Their helmets reflected the blue light of Earth behind them. It was more than a planet now, but it was home, family, and memory. Every heartbeat in their chests carried the same message: never again. The first clash was brutal. The enemy ships were faster, almost like ghosts moving through darkness. They fired beams of energy that cut through space like lightning. Many human ships were destroyed in the first few hours, but even in loss, the humans didn't stop. For every ship that fell, 2 more took its place. The enemy had better weapons, but humans had something stronger: determination. They fought like creatures who had nothing left to lose. On Earth, people gathered in front of screens watching live transmissions of the battle. They saw fire burning in space like stars dying one by one. The news anchors tried to stay calm, but their voices trembled. The world was united in fear and pride at the same time. Every fallen soldier was called a hero, and every victory, no matter how small, was celebrated like a festival. The spirit of humanity had become unstoppable. In the middle of all this chaos, small stories of bravery began to appear. In one ship, a pilot named Captain Rayan refused to eject even when his engine was burning. Instead, he turned his ship toward an enemy destroyer and rammed into it, destroying both in a single flash. His last words were recorded for Earth. That recording was played across the world and people cried. His sacrifice became a symbol of human courage. On another battlefield, a medic named Liana worked without rest, moving from one injured soldier to another. Her hands were covered in blood, but she kept whispering, "You'll be okay, you'll go home." She saved hundreds of lives before collapsing herself from exhaustion. When asked why she didn't stop, she smiled weakly and said, "Because they wouldn't stop for me either." Her words spread like fire across the networks. Humanity was not just fighting with weapons, it was fighting with heart. The enemy underestimated humans. They thought fear would break them, but fear only made them stronger. Every attack made Earth more united. The factories produced weapons faster, the soldiers trained harder, and the scientists worked day and night creating new strategies. Within weeks, humanity's defense had turned into offense. The humans began pushing back. The skies above Earth glowed red from the endless launches of rockets and ships. The oceans carried submarines loaded with missile systems. Even the moon became a base and a fortress in space. Humanity had turned their entire planet into a battlefield. But in the middle of this fire and fury, they never forgot who they were fighting for: their families, their children, their home. The war spread across the solar system. Battles erupted near Mars, near Jupiter's moons, even near the icy edge of Pluto. The stars themselves seemed to tremble as ships exploded and fragments burned across the black sky. The humans learned fast. They started using new tactics, surprising the enemy, cutting their supply lines, trapping them with decoy signals. Slowly, the balance began to shift. There was one battle that changed everything: the Battle of Titan. Titan was Saturn's largest moon, and it became the heart of the enemy's invasion plan. If humanity lost Titan, they would lose control of the entire outer system. The enemy's fleet was massive, stretching across miles of space. The human commanders knew the odds were terrible, but retreat was not an option. They called every available ship, every soldier, every drone. It was all or nothing. The battle lasted for 3 days and nights. Space burned like a storm of fire. The human fleet took heavy damage, but they refused to back down. At one point, it seemed like they would lose, until Commander Alara, one of the youngest captains, made a desperate decision. She ordered her ship to overload its energy core and fly straight into the enemy's main cruiser. Her final transmission was calm: "For every life they took, this is my answer." The explosion destroyed half of the enemy fleet and turned the tide. Humanity won Titan that day, but the victory came with tears. Thousands of soldiers never came back. On Earth, the victory was celebrated with both joy and sorrow. People cheered, cried, and prayed. They lit candles for the fallen and promised to never forget their names. Every name became a story, and every story became part of the war's heartbeat. As the months passed, the war turned darker. The enemy began to target civilian areas, trying to break human spirit. They destroyed satellite networks, attacked communication centers, and even tried to crash asteroids into Earth. But every time, humanity fought back with more strength than before. Even ordinary people joined. Engineers, doctors, and farmers worked together to support the soldiers. The world was no longer made of separate countries. It was one big family under fire. In one small city, a young girl named Alina started writing letters to soldiers at the front lines. Her words were simple but full of hope. "Don't be scared. "We are waiting for you. Allah is with you." Those letters reached soldiers in every corner of the war. Some kept them folded in their pockets during battle. For many, her letters became the reason to survive. The war was changing people. Mercy was no longer seen as kindness, it was seen as weakness. The generals gave orders without hesitation, and soldiers followed without question. The soft hearts that once dreamed of peace were now covered in steel. Humanity was learning how to win, but it was also slowly losing something, its innocence. Still, there were moments that reminded them of their humanity. During one battle near Mars, a group of soldiers rescued enemy survivors from a burning ship. When asked why, their captain said, "Because if we forget mercy completely, we'll become like them." His words were broadcast later, and for a short moment, the world remembered what it meant to be human. As the war entered its second year, the enemy began to retreat. Their attacks grew weaker, their numbers smaller. Humanity had done the impossible. They had faced an advanced power and survived. But survival had a price. Cities were in ruins, millions of lives were gone, and the stars above looked scarred with the marks of war. On a quiet night after one of the biggest victories, the soldiers on the front lines gathered to watch Earth from space. It looked peaceful again, shining like a jewel in the dark. One of the soldiers whispered, "It's strange. We fought all this to protect something so beautiful, but now it feels far away." No one replied. They just kept watching their home in silence. The fire and fury of war had shown the best and worst of humanity. They had fought like legends, but at the cost of peace within themselves. Every victory felt heavy. Every celebration came with a shadow. But deep inside, everyone knew one thing. This war had changed humanity forever. They were no longer the species that once prayed for mercy. They had become the species that made the universe tremble. The humans had proven something. They might fall, they might bleed, but they would never surrender. And from that day forward, the stars would always remember the fire that came from Earth, the fire that started with loss and ended with fury. When the war finally ended, the world looked nothing like the one people once knew. The skies were gray, filled with dust and smoke from destroyed cities. The oceans carried wreckage from fallen ships and machines. The wind no longer sang. It only carried the silence of loss. Humanity had won, but the victory felt empty. There were no cheers, no celebrations, only quiet faces staring at the ruins of what used to be their home. People looked at each other and felt both pride and sorrow. They had fought bravely, but they had also paid a heavy price. In the middle of the destruction, the survivors began to search for their loved ones. Some found them alive, holding on with weak smiles, while others found nothing but memories left in ashes. The war had taken fathers, mothers, children, and friends. No one was untouched. Even those who survived carried invisible wounds, the kind that no medicine could heal. The soldiers who came home were no longer the same. They had seen too much. Their eyes told stories that words could not. Days turned into weeks, and the world slowly began to rebuild. The cities that once shined with lights and laughter now became places of remembrance. People put flowers near the ruins, whispered prayers, and cried for the ones they lost. Governments tried to organize the chaos, but even they were broken. The leaders who once gave orders with confidence now stood in silence, realizing that they had unleashed something far greater than they could control. The scientists who had created the weapons of war felt guilt in their hearts. They had built machines to protect humanity, but those same creations had destroyed everything they loved. They walked through the wreckage, touching the burned metal and shattered glass, and wondered if the cost of safety was too high. For the first time, they understood that human strength was both a blessing and a curse. As the dust began to settle, people started to talk about peace. But peace now had a different meaning. Before the war, peace was something easy to imagine, a simple idea of quiet and comfort. Now it felt fragile, something that had to be protected with care. The survivors gathered in the ruins of the old capital, sitting around fires, telling stories of bravery and loss. Each story was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, humanity had never truly given up. Children who had grown up during the war asked their parents why it all happened. The adults had no answers. They just said, "Because we forgot what mercy meant." Those words stayed with the new generation. They understood that the real battle was not against enemies from outside, but against the hate and anger that lived inside every heart. The young ones began to dream of a world where people could fight for justice without losing their kindness. The soldiers, too, tried to find peace within themselves. Many of them had nightmares of the battles, the explosions, the screams, the moments they almost died. They often woke up sweating, their hearts pounding, seeing faces of those they couldn't save. Some of them wrote letters to the families of the fallen, apologizing for not being able to do more. Others walked alone through the empty fields, talking to the ghosts of their friends, asking for forgiveness. A few soldiers built small memorials out of stones and steel, marking the places where their comrades had fallen. They didn't write names, they just left flowers, hoping that wherever those souls were, they would know they were not forgotten. It was their way of saying goodbye, their way of healing. The world's technology had advanced because of the war, but people no longer felt proud of it. The machines that once symbolized progress now felt like reminders of destruction. Humanity had reached for greatness, but had lost compassion along the way. Now, they wanted to start over, slower, wiser, and softer. One morning, the sun rose over the ruins, and for the first time in years, the sky was clear. People stepped outside and felt the warmth on their skin. It felt like a message, that life still had meaning, that even after destruction there was a chance to rebuild. The children laughed, chasing each other among the broken walls, and that laughter felt like a new beginning. Somewhere in what used to be a battlefield, a young woman planted a tree. She was the daughter of a fallen soldier. She whispered for peace and watered the small plant with her tears. Others soon joined her, planting trees, flowers, and seeds across the land. Slowly, green began to return to the gray. It was as if Earth itself forgave humanity and offered them one more chance to live with kindness. As months passed, small communities started to rise again. People helped each other build homes from what was left. Food was shared, songs were sung, and prayers were said not for victory but for peace and forgiveness. There were still scars, deep ones, but the human heart proved stronger than any weapon. In the old capital, a monument was built. It wasn't grand or covered in gold. It was simple, a stone figure of two hands holding a small flame. The words carved beneath it said, "Never again." It became a sacred place. Survivors came there to sit in silence, feeling the wind and remembering what they had lost. Some wept, others smiled softly, and some just stood still, thinking about the lesson that came from their pain. Years later, when people spoke about the war, they didn't talk about victory or power. They talked about what it taught them, that mercy is not weakness and forgiveness is not surrender. They learned that once kindness is gone, everything else becomes meaningless. The new generation grew up reading those lessons. They studied history not to repeat it, but to protect what their parents had broken. Schools taught not just science and war strategy, but also empathy and humanity. Children learned that true courage is not in fighting, but in forgiving. The world slowly healed, and with it, so did the hearts of its people. Yet deep down, everyone knew that the shadow of war would always be a reminder of what happens when mercy is forgotten, a reminder of how strong and how dangerous humans can become when their hearts are filled with anger instead of love. One night, an old soldier stood on a hill overlooking the rebuilt city. The stars were bright again. He closed his eyes and whispered, "We went to war to protect humanity, but in the end, it was mercy that saved it." A tear ran down his cheek, and he smiled for the first time in years. The world had been broken but not destroyed. Humanity had fallen, but it rose again, and this time they promised never to lose their compassion, no matter how hard the world became. They understood that strength without mercy leads only to ruin, and that peace built on forgiveness lasts longer than any war ever could. As the wind blew gently across the land, carrying the scent of new flowers, the people of Earth finally felt something they had forgotten long ago: hope.